The story of 16-year-old Justice Garrett, whose life was brutally cut short in 2018, left her mother devastated beyond words. Danielle had no idea of the silent suffering her daughter had endured. Justice carried a heavy, terrible secret, one she guarded fiercely out of fear and dread of being judged, and that silence ultimately led to an unimaginable tragedy that took her life. Justice Mary Garrett was born on March 19, 2002. She was the elder of two daughters born to Danielle and Sebastian Garrett. She grew up alongside her much younger sister, Jeanette, who was 10 years her junior. Most of Justice's childhood and teenage years played out in the small coastal community of New Smyrna Beach, located in Volusia County, Florida. In 2016, her parents divorced, and both girls remained living with their mother. About a year later, Danielle began a relationship with a man named Robert Kern. By the fall of 2017, she and her daughters had moved to the tiny rural town of Sorrento, Florida, a quiet place with barely over 1,000 residents. They settled into Robert's home, but Justice found the change extremely difficult. She deeply missed her close circle of friends from New Smyrna Beach, and switching schools in the middle of the academic year only heightened her anxiety. On top of everything, she felt uneasy in the new house and around her mother's boyfriend. Even so, Justice did her best to keep the peace. She stayed courteous, laid back, and retained the same kind, humorous spirit everyone loved about her. At her new school, she soon made fresh connections and developed an especially close friendship with a classmate named Rel. The two became practically inseparable. Justice frequently stayed overnight at Rel's place, and they even called each other sisters on social media. On the morning of Friday, April 13, 2018, Justice overslept and missed her usual school bus. In a hurry to get ready, she skipped breakfast entirely. That same day, her younger sister Jeanette was feeling unwell and stayed home, with their mother planning to take her to the hospital. Justice decided to take the public bus to school instead, since it was only a short ride away. She slung her backpack over her shoulder, said goodbye to her mom, and stepped out the door. No one would ever see her alive again. When Justice failed to come home after classes, Danielle wasn't overly concerned at first. She figured her daughter had gone straight to Rel's house, as she so often did. By evening, Danielle assumed Justice had simply chosen to spend the night there, something that had become fairly common. Even the fact that Justice's phone was turned off didn't raise immediate red flags. But on Saturday morning, everything changed. Danielle received a worried call from Michelle, Rel's mother, asking if everything was okay with Justice. A wave of dread washed over Danielle as she asked, her voice trembling, whether Justice hadn't stayed over at their house. Michelle's reply hit like a blow: she hadn't seen Justice since Thursday. Justice had been absent from school on Friday, and her phone had been off for nearly 2 full days. Panic took hold. After repeated unsuccessful attempts to reach her daughter, Danielle rushed to the local police department and reported Justice missing. Law enforcement launched a search immediately. Learning that Justice had only lived in the area for about 6 months, investigators initially thought she might have returned to her old town to visit friends over the weekend. At that age, teenagers sometimes run off impulsively when they're upset or craving independence. They expected her to turn up soon. Yet Danielle insisted her daughter would never vanish without a word. Police began mapping out Justice's social circle, looking into whether she had a boyfriend, any recent arguments, or anything that might explain her disappearance. She had simply walked out the door headed for school, and then nothing. She carried no money, and every personal item remained at home. Her phone went dark shortly after she left, and she hadn't posted anything online since late Thursday evening. She responded to no calls or texts. None of her friends had any idea where she could be, and according to everyone close to her, she hadn't reached out to a single person. Justice didn't drink, didn't use drugs, and avoided any risky behavior. She wasn't in a relationship and had never been involved in anything serious romantically. She steered clear of troublemakers, had no conflicts with anyone, and had never been in legal trouble. Her teachers praised her character, and her classmates remembered her as gentle, compassionate, and warm. Investigators checked recent crime reports, disturbances, and traffic accidents throughout the region. They considered the chance she had been hurt in a crash and couldn't call for help, but nothing matched her description or circumstances. By examining cell phone data, authorities reconstructed her movements that morning. Around 7:30 a.m., Justice left the house and began walking toward school. Roughly 15 minutes later, her path took a strange detour. She paused for a moment, then abruptly changed direction. Soon afterward, her phone went completely offline. In the small, sleepy town, Justice's disappearance quickly became the center of attention. In a place where little ever happened, any unusual occurrence spread like wildfire, often twisted along the way. For some locals, rumors provided entertainment, and they spread them without hesitation. While Justice's real friends and many classmates genuinely wanted to help, others saw the case as an opportunity to gain attention or feel important. People came forward claiming sightings of Justice all over town. Some said they had watched her climb into a dark sedan with tinted windows. Others claimed she was hanging out with a rough crowd of teenagers. A few even whispered about her joining some kind of religious group. These stories appeared out of thin air, forcing detectives to chase down every lead, no matter how implausible. One girl, a student a year ahead of Justice, attracted special notice for her conduct. She started a full blog dedicated to the disappearance, insisting Justice had run away with a hidden boyfriend and was expecting a child. The girl was simply seeking attention and drama. Her actions led to school discipline, a temporary suspension, and the removal of her social media profiles for spreading falsehoods. On April 17, 4 days after Justice vanished, a man made a disturbing call to police. He reported finding something alarming in a wooded area on the outskirts of DeLand. An enthusiastic runner, he regularly jogged along a quiet trail that wound through a park and into dense forest. That morning, as he ventured farther in, a powerful stench of decomposition struck him. At first he thought it might be a dead animal and considered alerting the proper officials to remove it. Curiosity won out, however, and he followed the smell off the path. About 15 feet into the thick undergrowth, he came upon a gruesome discovery, a human body in a far advanced stage of decay, impossible to recognize. From the long hair and scraps of clothing, it appeared to be a teenage girl or young woman. He immediately called authorities and waited on the trail, taking care not to disturb the scene. When police arrived, they confirmed it was clearly a homicide scene involving a very young female. Her clothing was torn, and her undergarments were absent, pointing to a sexual and savage assault. Bite marks on her legs were likely from scavenging animals, but the most horrific damage came from a powerful chemical. The substance had corroded her face down to the skull and had been poured over her chest, lower torso, and genital region. The killer had clearly aimed to mutilate her and obliterate any biological evidence, a goal largely achieved. Investigators suspected the remains belonged to the missing teenager, but the extreme chemical destruction and decomposition required DNA confirmation. Tragically, the tests proved the worst fears of the Garrett family. It was Justice. Her body lay roughly a 30-minute drive from Sorrento. Evidence showed she had endured a severe beating beforehand. Her nose, cheekbone, and several ribs were fractured. Due to the condition of the remains, the precise cause of death couldn't be determined with certainty, though strangulation was strongly suspected. The man who found the body gave police valuable information. He mentioned spotting a suspicious person in the same area 2 days earlier. He ran the trail every couple of days, and on that previous occasion, he had seen a man emerging from the woods near the spot where the body would later be found. The glimpse was brief and from behind at a distance. He described the individual as a short, stocky white male dressed in jeans and a black hoodie. The man hurried away once he realized someone else was nearby. At the time, the runner thought it odd but didn't dwell on it. There was no odor that day. After discovering the remains, he recalled the encounter and informed detectives. Authorities considered that the stranger might have been the killer, possibly returning to the scene to cover his tracks. Forensic experts later determined the corrosive chemical was chlorine bleach. The combination of the chemical and Florida's humid climate had greatly accelerated decomposition, leaving the body unrecognizable. The jogger himself was quickly eliminated as a suspect after passing a polygraph examination and providing a verifiable alibi for the day Justice disappeared. According to Danielle, Justice had intended to catch the public bus that morning. However, street camera footage showed she never made it to the bus stop, adding to the mystery. Then a neighbor came forward with a critical detail: they had seen Justice enter a vehicle belonging to her stepfather, Robert. This information shifted the investigation dramatically. Detectives questioned Danielle and Sebastian again to understand why this detail hadn't surfaced earlier. Danielle admitted that Robert's driver's license had recently been suspended temporarily. Since Justice was running late, he had offered to drive her. She had kept quiet initially to protect him from trouble, still convinced her daughter would come home safely. Police obtained surveillance video from cameras near the school, but it showed no sign of Robert dropping Justice off there or anywhere close. His vehicle never appeared on any cameras along the expected route. So where had they actually gone? With this development, Robert Kern emerged as the last known person to see Justice alive. When confronted again, he acknowledged driving her that morning despite his suspended license. According to Robert, Justice had begged him not to take her to school, but instead to drive her to a nearby town called DeLand, where she said she had arranged to meet a secret boyfriend. He claimed he didn't know who the boyfriend was and had resisted at first. Eventually, he relented, wanting to improve their rocky relationship. Justice had asked him to keep the trip secret from her mother, promising she would return later that day on her own and stay over at a friend's house since it was Friday. Robert said he saw nothing strange about the request. This story introduced the possibility of an unknown boyfriend. Police urgently needed to identify and question him, as he might have been involved or at least the final person to see her before she vanished. Investigators examined Justice's phone contacts and social media, though the phone itself was never recovered, and seized her laptop. What they found deepened the mystery. Justice had several accounts and interacted regularly with real-life and online friends, but there was no trace of any romantic relationship or secret boyfriend. However, one particular account stood out as highly suspicious. A young man named Kevin had shown intense interest in Justice for months, messaging her daily, liking every post, and leaving flattering comments on her pictures. Justice, however, showed little interest. She rarely replied, frequently ignored him, and made no effort to engage. Her friends later confirmed she had complained about a persistent online admirer whose constant messages annoyed her far more than flattered her. Kevin's profile suggested he was about 2 years older and lived locally. His photo showed an athletic, good-looking young man, yet none of Justice's friends or family had ever met him in person. Forensic analysis soon proved the account was fake, with images stolen from the internet. Technical investigation traced the account's origin and it belonged to an adult man. Robert Kern, Justice's stepfather, was summoned for another interview. Detectives confronted him about creating the fake profile and contacting his stepdaughter under false pretenses. Robert seemed momentarily caught off guard that they had connected him to the account, but he quickly recovered and provided an explanation. He said he made the profile to build Justice's confidence. As the new girl in town and at school, he thought she would appreciate compliments from an attractive peer. Yet Justice had already settled in well, forming many friendships quickly. In recent months, however, those closest to her had noticed a change. The bright, easygoing girl had become noticeably tense and withdrawn. She never explained why, but she spent so much time at Rel's that it almost seemed she had moved in. Even then, she never confided in her best friend about what was wrong. Rel later recalled that Robert had come to pick Justice up several times. Each time, Justice looked visibly uncomfortable and reluctant to leave. She would call her mother, begging to stay longer, promising to complete chores and keep up with schoolwork. Danielle usually allowed it. Friends knew Justice and Robert had never gotten along well, but she never described any aggression or inappropriate conduct. No one, including Danielle, had observed anything alarming in his behavior toward her. As evidence accumulated, Robert Kern became the sole focus of the investigation into Justice's murder. Police detained him for extensive questioning while digging into his background and habits. At 43, Robert had an extensive criminal history, including convictions for burglary, drug possession, and violent offenses. His record had severely limited his ability to hold steady work. He picked up occasional under-the-table carpentry jobs at a local sawmill to get by. Detectives worked to connect his troubled past, his conduct toward Justice, and the sequence of events leading to her death. He had carefully concealed his criminal record from everyone, including Danielle, who was shocked when authorities revealed the truth. Danielle then admitted that Robert had insisted on driving Justice to school that morning, even though Justice had resisted. When she didn't return, Danielle grew worried, but Robert repeatedly assured her justice was staying at Rel's. He even discouraged her from calling police or contacting Rel directly. A search of Robert's devices uncovered disturbing activity in the months leading up to the disappearance. He had repeatedly researched substances capable of knocking someone unconscious or immobilizing them. He had explored purchasing such chemicals on the dark web, and evidence suggested he succeeded. Beyond that, he had studied ways to eliminate DNA evidence from a corpse, focusing on everyday chemicals like bleach and cleaning agents. He had also examined satellite imagery of nearby forested areas, particularly the outskirts of DeLand, where Justice's body was later found. It was apparent that Robert had spent months carefully planning the crime, the disposal of the body, and the destruction of evidence tied to his motive. He had developed an obsessive, inappropriate fixation on justice and decided that force was the only way to fulfill his desires. To avoid any legal consequences, he chose to kill her. Any lingering uncertainty about his guilt disappeared when police analyzed geolocation data from his phone. On the morning in question, he had driven with Justice toward the school as claimed, but then abruptly diverted to a remote location and stopped. This was likely when he used a chemical substance, possibly chloroform, to subdue her and powered off her phone. He failed, however, to disable his own device, which continued tracking his movements. The vehicle was tracked to the DeLand area, where it remained stationary for approximately 1 hour, a timeframe consistent with assaulting Justice, beating her severely, strangling her, and hiding her body in the woods. He had brought a container of chlorine-based chemical, which he poured over her face and other areas in an attempt to destroy evidence. Growing paranoid that he might have overlooked something, Robert returned to the site 2 days later with more bleach and doused her remains extensively, focusing on her head, chest, and lower body. That was the morning the jogger spotted him leaving the woods and soon afterward discovered the body, alerting authorities. Robert's alibi collapsed quickly. While working off the books at the sawmill, he had asked 2 co-workers to falsely state he arrived on time that day, when in reality he was almost 2 hours late. When confronted with potential charges for lying and obstructing justice, both men admitted the truth. Robert Kern denied every accusation, but the mountain of evidence was insurmountable. The case proceeded to trial. Those who knew Justice described her final months as filled with quiet terror. She avoided being at home whenever possible, yet she never told anyone why, not even her mother. Danielle, caught up in her new relationship, missed every warning sign and never inquired about Robert's background. Prosecutors systematically destroyed Robert's explanations, proving he had planned the murder with cold precision, fully intending that Justice would not survive. Soil and moss samples from the crime scene matched particles recovered from the floor mats of Robert's car, providing yet another physical link. Due to the extensive use of corrosive chemicals, no conclusive evidence of sexual assault could be established. The substance had destroyed nearly all biological material, eating away flesh down to bone. In August 2022, almost 2.5 years after the murder, Robert Kern was found guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. He received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, guaranteeing he will never walk free again. If this tragic case captured your attention, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. We bring you new true crime stories every single night. Until our next video, stay aware, stay careful.